Well, it is a delight to welcome Don Simmonds, Chairman of the Board of Crossroads, my boss, and someone who has led this ministry so well through the years, now serving as our chairman. Don, it's good to see you. Welcome back to this.
Good to see you and be here in person.
Well, we're glad to have you back in a place you're quite familiar with.
Thank you.
Thank you for your leadership. We're going to be talking about the trip that you recently made to Israel, and it's very, very exciting. And perhaps before we get engaged in conversation, I want you to take a look at this footage. It'll help set it up for us.
Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper, along with his wife Laureen, arrived in Israel this week to embark on what would become a journey of firsts. Not only was this Harper's first visit to the region, but it marked the first time a serving Canadian Prime Minister stepped foot on Israeli soil in 14 years. And Harper did not come alone. The Canadian Prime Minister was accompanied by an exceptionally large 208-member delegation made up of members of parliament, rabbis, Christian ministry leaders, and businessmen.
I have to say, Stephen, that you are a great friend of Israel and the Jewish people. I'm not just saying that. I mean it deeply from the bottom of my heart, and I speak for all the people of Israel. This world is often cynical and hypocritic, and you have shown great moral leadership.
The warmth and mutual admiration between the two nations and the two world leaders became immediately apparent.
How significant is this trip?
It's historic. It's once in a lifetime, well, at least for Canada, it's a long time. It's been a decade or more since we've had a prime minister here, but a delegation of this magnitude to this country, the atmosphere on the plane was celebratory.
Well, I can tell you as mayor of Jerusalem, having your best friend come over, having the prime minister of practically one of the most best friends, most committed, loyal people to the Jewish people, to the state of Israel, is a huge honor.
Harper then made history by becoming the first foreign dignitary in the history of Israel to be given the key to the Knesset. Then, moments later, another first. Stepping up to address the Israeli Knesset, Harper became the first Canadian Prime Minister to be given such an honor. His historic speech was unabashedly marked by moral clarity and staunch support for the sole democracy in the region.
Canada supports Israel fundamentally because it is right to do so. This by the way, is a very Canadian trait, to do something for no reason other than it is right, even when no immediate reward for or threat to ourselves is evident. But our support does mean at least three things. First, Canada finds it deplorable that some in the international community still question the legitimacy of the existence of the State of Israel. Second, Canada believes that Israel should be able to exercise its full rights as a UN member state and to enjoy the full measure of its sovereignty. Third, we refuse to single out Israel for criticism on the international stage. Most disgracefully of all, some openly call Israel an apartheid state. Now,
the climax of Harper's address, found in his closing comments, left many of the Canadian Jewish members of his delegation awestruck.
And therefore, through fire and water, Canada will stand with you. Friends, you've been...
I don't remember ever in my lifetime being at an event where I was so overwhelmed as I was when I heard the Prime Minister. When you consider all of our history, my grandparents, great-grandparents, all victims of the Holocaust, and we are in Knesset, which is the hall of Jewish dialogue, for Israel, and to have a Canadian Prime Minister, the Canadian Prime Minister, coming and saying through fire and water, we are with you, and he means it because he has proven it already. It's just so overwhelming. I don't think there are words to describe it.
Although streets were adorned with Canadian flags and there was clear evidence of a Canadian presence in Jerusalem.
Not all Israelis are aware of the fact that there's a pro-Israel world leader in town, but for those who heard Stephen Harper's Knesset speech, there is nothing but appreciation.
I saw in the news that the Canadian Prime Minister was here, and I heard what he said, and they spoke about it in the newspaper a lot. It was heartwarming.
It makes me feel really good that there is a country that supports us and stands with us.
But what motivates the Canadian government to posture itself as a strong friend of Israel?
There is room for leadership on the international stage. There hasn't been clarity in the United Nations. There hasn't been clarity from all of our partners and allies about what it means to support democracy, market economies, economic success, all of which Israel represents. And Canada has taken that stand. I think we will find ourselves increasingly respected in Israel and well beyond for having taken it.
Yet not all Canadian governments of the past have had the same connection with the Zionist state. Clearly something has shifted in Canada. With Prime Minister Stephen Harper at the helm, Canada has emerged as a world leader, unafraid to take the moral high ground, the increasingly unpopular thing to do on an international stage of growing hostility toward the tiny Zionist state of Israel. Marnie Blom, Axe News Network, Jerusalem.
Here with Don Simmonds, Chairman of the Board of Crossroads Media Group, and just returned from this amazing trip. You were right there in the arena seeing it all firsthand. Who was on this trip?
Well, it was a very interesting, very large delegation, perhaps one of the largest ever. If you look across, people like Andrew Bennett, who's a beautiful Catholic young man who is the ambassador for the Office of Religious Freedom here in Canada. David Wells, in charge of the Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada. Bill Ayad, a tremendous Arab Catholic man who was on the trip and joined this faith group, and some of the other denominational leaders and myself. It was a joy to be there.
So how was this received by people on the ground? They're just on the street, the Israeli people, the Canadian Prime Minister's visit.
You know, the video report talked about that a little bit, and you know, as I move about internationally, and you may have done the same, often you can tell what's going on when you talk to shopkeepers and taxi drivers.
That's very true.
And there was not one that we encountered who would notice our Canadian pin and not, first of all, know what was going on with the Prime Minister's visit, and secondly, express deep appreciation for the fact that Canada was standing with their nation.
What were some things as a leader, as a faith leader, as a business leader in this country, what are some things that, from a leadership perspective, that you left with and are staying with you even right now?
Yeah, I think, I mean, so much happens in a few days on a trip like that. It almost takes some time after the fact to unpack it all. I believe it was a historic trip. It was a visit or an initiative from the Canadian government of some magnitude. I think some magnitude for the future also that will be talked about and compared. If I go back to being, say, an individual Canadian, a businessman, a father, a person of faith, and I start there and sort of say, here I was on the inside of this, I had three primary observations, actually, John. The first one was how much the Canadian government got done. When I think of what it took to orchestrate that, there were trade talks, there was bilateral talks on defense and matters of mutual interest and peace and all kinds of things going on.
It just isn't the head of state showing up and making a speech.
You know, all of the ministers had their own separate agendas. And so it was impressive to me just how much productivity there was on this visit. Secondly, the support for Israel itself. I don't know if you realize, but historically, during the Holocaust, an actual ship sailed across the Atlantic and got to the Canadian shores with Jews on board from Germany. Mm-hmm. And we turned that ship back. Mm. So do you know, we haven't been pure on our support. And people know that the Jewish people have been attacked and maligned for years. and are continuing to have that happen to them. So to be part of this stand for correctness, for right, regardless of what the forces are in the world today, was really motivating. It was moving, as a matter of fact, to be part of that and to be a Canadian in the midst of that. And of course, as Christians, we believe strongly in who the Jewish people are to God. But thirdly, what a moment of leadership. John, you probably know that I coach hockey.
That's right.
So every year I'm confronted with 20 young men where I'm trying to instill values and character. And we talk about leadership and what leadership is. And you know, we don't have that many models of leadership that I can point to, on the political arena at least, where a leader is willing to do the right thing no matter what the cost. So I came back, even on that level, very much inspired to have a prime minister and a country and a government that would stand up in the world today and say, we're doing it because it's right.
We're glad to have you back. We're so grateful that you were able to be there and to represent the business community and the faith community. And we at Crossroads and many in our audience have been praying for you, and we're delighted with this report today. And I would encourage you to join us at Crossroads 360. And Don and I are going to continue to have this conversation with some insights as to his visit to Israel. We're so glad that you've joined us today. We're grateful, Don. Thank you so much. God bless you. We love and appreciate you.
Thank you, John.